I challenged myself to build one thing every single day for 8 weeks. And this week, well, my theme was organics, as you can kind of see a bit of a sneak peek behind me. Now, organics are not my thing. I haven't built a lot of them, so this was definitely a challenge. But you're about to go on a deep dive of my entire creative process for the whole week. So let's stop wasting time. Let's jump straight in. So with this build, the first thing I did was actually go through and try and figure out the structure and the basic shape. And you can see roughly about here, I realized it's way too short, so I go in with World Edit and extend the branches up a bit. Then I go through with pale oak to try and mimic that coloring of a gum tree, like a lot of white and paler colors, and just replace them with blocks, add in some branches with some fence posts, and just try and flesh out the tree trunk. And then once I had the base down, I tried to go in with some texturing, and this is where I struggled a little bit because gum trees are a very unique color and texture, and Minecraft blocks don't really lend a hand towards that. And you can see I kind of about here realized that I might have block formatted a little bit. So I just try and clean it up with a bit more pale oak and just bring some more cohesiveness. Then I went in with leaf blocks. I tried to choose darker variants because obviously gum trees do tend to have a darker leaf texture. And then I kind of just spanned leaves in like curved spherical shapes. There's not really one particular way to build trees because, well, if you go outside and look at a tree, they're all going to be quite different. So my approach was start roughly where you've got the branches and then just span. And yeah, that kind of worked pretty well, and I've got a tree. So here are some final shots. Let's see what I did on day 2. So for this dragon build, I thought it would probably be a good idea to start with a base and then go into the rest of the build. So you can see here I'm working on like the snout area. I at this time have a couple of reference photos pulled up, and I'm trying to figure out the overall shape and structure of a dragon. And I think it's roughly around here where I start thinking this is too big for the scale of the rocks and stuff, but I'm choosing to ignore it. I'm hoping I can figure it out. And I'm really trying to get the shape of the dragon right. Considering this is based on both a traditional Western fire dragon combined with an ender dragon, I'm also relying on dark block colors and like diorite and magenta. Around here, I've kind of figured that the snout was probably a bit too stubby, so I elongated it. It was a pretty easy fix, and I think that rapidly fixed it. I also got rid of the base and pulled it up so that I could work on the neck, because I was just doing a bust of this dragon. I realized very quickly there was no way I was fitting an entire dragon in a 32 by 32 square. But I got a little curvy S shape, a really long neck. I kind of built him really thin, and that's something I do regret. I wish I had made him a bit more bigger and a bit more fleshed out. But for first shot, I think I did all right. There's definitely room for improvement. And of course, here are some glamour shots of our little dragon. Yeah, this is a revamped Ender Dragon, I guess you could say. A realistic Ender Dragon still built in Minecraft. I hope you took something away from this, and let's see what we did on day 3. So for day 3, I decided to build some rocks, mainly to play with various shapes and sizes, because, you know, rocks come in multiple shapes and sizes. So what I'm doing here is trying to map out kind of the rough shapes that I would like, and I'm using wool and then going over with my first color scheme, which is a color scheme I've used before, sandstone as a base, and then transitioning into pale moss. And I genuinely really love this color scheme. And you can see I'm going over the top with the moss. I've tried to figure out a little bit of the shape and the base, and I'm kind of just playing with the shape as I go along. Then I'm outlining it with the cobblestone and then transitioning it with andesite and dead coral blocks into the sand. So it's kind of like a cap on top. And it was a lot more trial and error throughout this. You can see me breaking a lot of blocks and then just trying to tweak the shape like little bit by little bit, mainly so that I can get a cohesive structure and make it look kind of natural. Because the thing about rocks is you can kind of go anywhere and it will look all right because of how bizarre rocks are in real life. And then I decided to use a slightly different color scheme. I went with granite and jungle planks to create a warmer, more rounded boulder. Again, playing with a different color scheme, playing with a different shape and style. That was my whole goal of this exercise, play with different shapes and styles. And here I forget to unpause on my flashback. So boom, here's a boulder. This is a lot shorter, stouter, rounder, a lot more grays, and you can see me very disappointed here. I'm shaking my head at myself. I was telling myself I needed to unpause flashback, but I forgot to unpause flashback, as you do, so I'm running away and hiding. But yeah, here are some glamour shots. I'm quite proud of this. I do think the one in the back probably could have benefited from being bigger and longer, but the two in the front I think are quite cute, and they worked. Good practice. So for this build, I decided to try and approach it like it was a drawing. You may have watched the short and heard me mention that I actually really enjoy drawing hands. However, that is in the 2D, and I realized very quickly it would be quite hard to translate 2D into a 3D. So while I was able to get a simple base structure down here, once I started adding blocks to like fill it out and like was looking at the side of my hand as a reference, I quickly realized as I was out of my league. Simply because your hand is quite thin and the blocks, the squares provide such a chunkiness. Granted, with the new updates we now have things like shelves and trapdoors that kind of act almost vertical slab type, but because of the texture it also kind of looked wrong. However, the reason I had to use oak was because if I used terracotta I wouldn't have any of those options or other blocks as well. But you can kind of see me just slowly go through and flesh out the shapes and the sizes with those trapdoors and those slabs and the stairs. Especially on the fingers are quite straight. If you actually look at your hand, you'll notice that they are kind of straight, a little bit chunkier at the bottom and a bit thinner at the top. And you can see I've tried to emulate that with putting more shelves and trapdoors around the base of the fingers and then a little bit on the top at the back where it like curves and flicks up. But yeah, this is the hand. I tried to focus mainly on the bone structure as well, where your skin touches your bones and like curves and flows. And you can see that a little bit better in this, where we get the nice zoom shots and everything, where you've got like the gap in your palm, the way that your two fingers are a bit more diagonal. Yeah. So with this build, one thing I regret doing is the small scale. As you can see, my base circle is a 3 radius, and I kind of wish I'd gone bigger, but at the same time, it was a big challenge working at a small scale, getting the details to look detailed without being super messy and cluttered at this scale. So it was also a bit of a practice in that sense. But you can see me going in, building this terracotta pot, trying to figure out how to get like the dirt to look good. So I used various different blocks, slabs, mixed in with dirt, black terracotta and black concrete powder to give that texture. And then I just went in with different greens and just messed around trying to get some colors. You can see me here messing around with glass color before settling on the more subtle green stained glass rather than the white. And then again with the orange tends to be a little bit more limited. It's a very vibrant orange if you want any of the slabs or stairs, or a bit more of a pinky one if you're going the copper scheme. So yeah, I had to mess around with that, figure out my colors. Then for the other succulent, I wanted like a tealy, translucenty, bluey green color, and my only real option for that was prismarine or copper. And prismarine is a bit too blue for what I was trying to do, and I still do think that it is a little too blue. I should have just gone more with the waxed weathered, lightly weathered, not the fully weathered one. But I still think it turned out alright. Here are the glamour shots, of course. I definitely think if I'd been working at a bigger scale, it could have been better, but you know, it's still a bit of fun. So with this build, I knew right away from experience on the dragon one, I'd need to position it quite high on my plot. So I went up quite high and then started trying to flesh out the overall shape. Now I had a few reference photos from the front and the side, and I was just trying to get the snout shape correct and the shading as well, because I noticed that the top of the head is actually quite dark, hence why I've used spruce, whereas the front is a bit lighter, hence why I've used oak and birch. But anyway, you can kind of just see me going around and messing around with shaping. When I do organics, I don't tend to block in big overall shapes. I tend to just work with details, like take a clump and then kind of smooth it out, kind of like you're working with clay. As you can see, I realized that he was a bit too stubby, and so I used World Edit to drag his nose out, elongate it a bit, and I think that worked so much better. He looks So much better with his nose being a little bit further out. And then you can just see me messing around with different blocks for the ears. I love the new shelf blocks. They are so good. You can see how I've used them to add a bit more texture. Not texture, definition to the face. Because if I hadn't had those, well, it'd just be very flat, or if I'd used a full block, it'd be very chunky, and that's not what we're going for. But you can see me going in with the neck, adding a bit of hair. Here I tried to add a tongue, it just wasn't vibing, and as you can see, I have removed it because I just couldn't get the shapes right, and I was running out of time to finish this build. But I'm actually quite proud of this. I think he's super cute, and I'm very happy for a first draft. So for the final build of the first week, I realized that I was quite pushed for time. So I decided to opt for something in my mind I thought would be a little bit simpler, a little bit smaller. And so I built this apple tree. And what you can see here is I'm going through, I built up a base trunk, and then I've gone through with a bunch of stairs, slabs, and most importantly, fences, because you'll notice trees tend to get a lot thinner towards the top. And so fences and fence gates really help add to that. And then I'm going over with leaves. Again, I'm kind of just spamming, but I'm not just like completely just block spamming. I'm taking great care in remembering that leaves kind of curve around the branches. So starting at the point and then curving it down in my spam. And then I'm going over with a slightly lighter leaf block, and then inside where it's a bit darker, going through with some green concrete. And then over the outside, adding a bunch of green stained glass and green stained glass panes, because they just like to add a bit of texture. And I just think the combination of glass and concrete work really well with the leaves. They add a bit more variation. You can see here I've gone through with a bunch of banners just to add a bit more, movement and texture. But I end up changing all of the banners to red because after all, this is an apple tree and we need to see some apples. I also used some lime banners just to make some unripe apples. And then I put some apples on the ground with some more banners to show that they are a little bit more rotten. But here is the final apple tree. I'm actually super happy with how this turned out. This whole week has been a lot of fun, and I cannot wait to catch you all for week 2.